The CEO laughed at the car over a backyard fence, not knowing the engine under that torn tarp would soon outrun everything her company had built. Caleb Turner heard the laugh before he saw who made it. It came from the alley side of his backyard on a dry Saturday morning in Phoenix, sharp enough to cut through the buzz of his old work light and the soft metallic click of the ratchet in his hand. He was crouched beside a car that most people would not have called a car at all. The frame sat low on mismatched tires. The side panels had been cut from 3 different vehicles and shaped by hand until they almost agreed with one another. Bare weld lines ran along the rear quarter like scars that had not learned to hide. A sun-faded tarp hung over half the body, tied down with bungee cords that had lost most of their stretch. Beside the open toolbox stood Sophie, 6 years old, holding a small red toy race car against her shirt and watching her father work with the solemn attention children give to things they believe are important. Caleb did not look up at first. He tightened the bolt 1/4 turn, then wiped his hand on the towel tucked into his back pocket. Across the fence, Madison Vale stood beside a clean black SUV with tinted windows, wearing a polished motorsport jacket with the quiet confidence of someone used to seeing doors open before she touched them. 2 men in city planning vests stood near her, pointing toward the empty lots beyond Caleb's property, where Vale Apex Motorsports had been rumored to be building a new testing facility. Derek Sloan stood behind Madison with a tablet in one hand, his eyes moving over Caleb's backyard machine with an expression that became amusement too quickly. "Is that supposed to race?" Derek asked, not loudly, but loud enough. Madison stepped closer to the fence and looked over the tarp, the mismatched tires, the unfinished panels, the chalk marks on the concrete, and the little girl standing beside a bucket of bolts. Then she smiled. "It looks like a junk pile with wheels," she said. One of the planners laughed because she had made it safe to laugh. Derek did not even try to hide his grin. Sophie's small hand tightened around the toy car. Caleb heard the change in her breathing. That was the part that reached him. Not Madison's voice. Not Derek's face. Not the polished black SUV idling near the alley while his own truck sat with a cracked mirror and a missing hubcap. It was Sophie, standing barefoot on the warm concrete, suddenly wondering if the thing her father had spent 3 years building was something to be ashamed of. Caleb set the ratchet down slowly. He could have told Madison about the thermal channels running under the side skin, or the way the engine placement moved weight away from the front axle, or the reason those ugly welds were exactly where load needed to travel. He could have told Derek that unfinished did not mean unplanned. He said nothing. He only reached for a clean rag, wiped grease from his fingers, and rested one hand lightly on Sophie's shoulder. She looked up at him. "Is our car ugly?" Caleb looked at the machine under the torn tarp, then at Madison through the fence. "It does not have to look fast," he said, "to be fast." Madison heard him and laughed once more, softer this time, already turning away. By noon, her SUV was gone, the planners were gone, and the alley was quiet again. Caleb went back to the bolt. Sophie sat on an overturned crate and placed her toy race car on the concrete facing his machine. In the still heat of the backyard, beneath dust, scrap panels, and a tarp everyone else mistook for failure, the car waited without defending itself. So did Caleb. After Madison Vale's SUV disappeared from the alley, the backyard became quiet in a way Caleb Turner trusted more than applause. The city noise returned slowly, a lawn mower 3 houses down, a dog behind a block wall, the dry scrape of palm leaves moving in the Phoenix heat. Sophie stayed on the overturned crate with her red toy race car pointed toward the unfinished machine, as if the 2 vehicles were waiting for the same signal. Caleb picked up the ratchet again, but he did not tighten the bolt right away. He looked at his daughter first. Her face was still turned toward the fence. "Do people laugh at race cars before they win?" she asked. Caleb wiped one thumb along the edge of the socket, buying himself 1 second to answer without giving her bitterness. "Sometimes," he said. "When they do not know what they are looking at." Sophie looked back at the car. "Do you?" Caleb glanced at the frame, the chalk marks, the airflow channels hidden beneath ugly side panels, the suspension points he had measured until the numbers lived in his hands. "I know what I am trying to build." That was as close as he came to bragging. He had learned, long before Sophie was born, that explaining too much to the wrong people only gave them more ways to misunderstand you. He stood, rolled his shoulders once, and moved to the front assembly. Sophie slid off the crate and brought him the half-inch wrench without being asked. It was too big for her hand, so she held it with both. Caleb took it carefully, the way a man accepts something sacred disguised as a tool. "Thank you, Chief." She almost smiled. The backyard behind the small stucco house did not look like a place where anything important should happen. The fence leaned slightly along the alley. The concrete slab had old oil shadows and white chalk lines drawn across it like a child's map of a city. A folding table held a temperature gauge, 3 coffee-stained notebooks, a cracked laptop, and a photograph of Emily Turner clipped to the corner of a metal shelf. Emily had been gone 2 years, but Caleb still kept her picture facing the car because she had been the first person who listened when the idea was only a sentence he could not explain cleanly. Passive thermal recovery. Heat redirected instead of fought. Air guided through the body instead of forced through it by heavier systems that failed when dust, distance, and desert heat turned clever engineering into dead weight. Vail Apex Motorsports had not wanted the idea when it had his name on it. Or maybe that was not true. They had wanted it badly enough after Derek Sloan learned how to remove his name. Caleb had carried that knowledge quietly because grief arrived before anger had time to organize itself. Emily's diagnosis, the hospital drives, the leave requests, the meetings he missed for the right reasons and was punished for in the wrong language. Poor collaboration. Reduced team alignment. Performance concerns. Words clean enough to put in a file and empty enough to hide what had happened. By the time his badge stopped opening the Vail Apex gate, Derek's version of the design was already moving through presentations upstairs. Caleb could have fought. He had a daughter who needed dinner, a wife who needed him present, and a life that did not pause for justice. So he came home. He built slowly. He used reclaimed aluminum, discarded tubing, salvaged suspension pieces, and every hour after Sophie fell asleep that his body could still afford. He did not build to impress Madison Vail. He did not build to shame Derek Sloan. He built because the math was still true, and because some ideas become part of a person when they are carried long enough. That afternoon, after the laugh had passed and the backyard heat settled against the walls, Caleb tightened the bolt, checked the gauge, and watched Sophie place her toy car beside the front tire. "Will it answer them?" she asked. Caleb looked toward the fence where Madison had stood. "Not today," he said. "Someday on the road." Then he went back to work, quiet as ever, teaching his daughter that some things answer better when they are moving. The first time Caleb Turner saw Derek Sloan present his idea, the conference room at Vail Apex Motorsports was colder than the hallway outside. Not because of the air conditioning, though the building always kept its glass offices sharp and comfortable, but because Caleb understood within 3 slides that something living had been taken from him and dressed in someone else's language. The room had been full of people who believed they were discussing innovation. Madison Vail sat at the head of the table with a tablet in front of her and a clean black motorsport jacket over the back of her chair. She was younger than most of the men who reported to her, sharper than almost all of them, and already known for cutting through excuses without raising her voice. Derek stood near the screen, confident, bright-eyed, and careful, explaining a thermal management concept that looked almost unfamiliar under his formatting. Until Caleb saw the cross-section. The channel angle was his. The load path was his. The reason the system worked without a forced pump was his. Derek had changed the vocabulary, moved 2 reference points, and removed the notebook sketches Caleb had drawn during lunch breaks, but the math had not changed because the math could not lie. Caleb sat halfway down the table in a gray button-down shirt with his employee badge clipped to his pocket, his phone face down beside a message from Emily's doctor that he had not yet had time to read. He waited for the part where Derek said they had built from Caleb's original proposal. That part never came. Madison leaned forward slightly when Derek showed the projected endurance data. "How soon can this be integrated into the desert platform?" she asked. Derek answered before anyone else could breathe. 6 months if the team stays aligned. The word team crossed the table like a door closing. Caleb looked at him then. Derek did not look back. After the meeting, Caleb asked for 10 minutes in Madison's office. She gave him 6. He explained quietly, because that was how he explained everything, that the proposal originated in his design notebook, that the earliest sketches were dated, that the passive channel geometry came from 11 months of testing after hours. Madison listened with the expression of someone trying to decide whether the problem was technical or personal. Derek had already told her Caleb was struggling, distracted, difficult to coordinate with, pulled away by family issues he refused to separate from work. None of that sounded cruel when said inside a company. It sounded responsible. It sounded documented. Caleb did not know then how cleanly a man could be erased by phrases that looked professional in an email. 3 weeks later, his access badge stopped working at the gate. The official reason was reduced collaboration capacity during a restructuring cycle. The unofficial reason stood behind Madison in the parking lot that morning, holding a tablet and not meeting Caleb's eyes. Emily was still alive then, waiting at home with medication lined up beside the sink and Sophie's drawings taped to the refrigerator. Caleb drove back to the small stucco house, sat in the truck for 11 minutes, then went inside because grief and injustice both had to wait when a child needed lunch. Years passed, but the design stayed. Not in a file. Not on a server Derek could rename. It stayed in Caleb's hands, in the way he cut aluminum, in the chalk lines across the backyard concrete, in the channels hidden under panels everyone called ugly. They had erased his name from the presentation. They had not erased the road from his head. By the time the rest of Phoenix had gone quiet, Caleb Turner's backyard was still awake. The work light hung from a bent metal stand near the driver's side, throwing a hard white circle over the scrap car and leaving the corners of the yard in warm desert darkness. Sophie had fallen asleep in a camping chair near the back door with a thin blanket over her knees, her red toy race car resting in the pocket of her hoodie. Caleb checked on her every 20 minutes without setting an alarm. He simply knew. Fathers learned clocks differently after loss. The car sat on jack stands above chalk marks that covered the concrete like a private language. Arrows. Angles. Temperature notes. Airflow paths. Small numbers written and rewritten until only Caleb could tell which ones still mattered. Owen Briggs arrived at 9:30 with a milk crate full of salvaged aluminum tubing, 2 used temperature sensors, and a box of fasteners he claimed had been taking up space in his shop. Owen ran a repair garage 3 miles away and had known Caleb long enough not to ask why he was still working when most men would have gone inside. He set the crate down, looked at the car, and shook his head slowly. It still looks like it fell off 3 trailers. Caleb reached for one of the tubes and held it against the side channel. Good. Owen glanced at him. Caleb marked the tubing with a pencil. Nobody steals what they think is ugly. Owen did not laugh. He had heard enough of the Vale Apex story to know some jokes had edges. The machine in the yard was not pretty because Caleb had stopped caring about pretty the year his life became hospital rooms, school pickups, and bills stacked under refrigerator magnets. It was light because he had removed everything that did not serve the run. It was strange because heat did not move through it the way it moved through the cars in Madison Vale's lab. Under the hand-cut panels, air entered low, split through 2 narrow channels, crossed the engine bay at an angle, and carried heat out through vents that looked accidental if you did not understand why they were there. The frame had been built from reclaimed sections, but the geometry was not improvised. The rear suspension looked uneven until weight settled under load. The engine sat farther back than most people expected, not because Caleb had guessed, but because he had measured how the car would behave after 50 miles, not 50 feet. Owen crouched near the front tire and pointed at the open channel. You really think it will hold temperature in the desert? Caleb slid the tubing into place and checked the fit. I think forced systems fail when dust makes them work harder than they were designed to work. That is not what I asked. Caleb looked toward Sophie sleeping by the door. Yes. The word was quiet. It did not need to be larger. Past midnight, Owen left. Caleb stayed. He mounted the tubing, checked the sensor leads, adjusted the panel gap by less than a quarter inch, and wrote one more number in chalk near the front tire. At 1:15, Sophie stirred and opened her eyes. Is it done? She asked, half asleep. Caleb looked at the car, the exposed welds, the ugly panels, the unfinished paint, the cooling paths hidden where no one at the fence had thought to look. No, he said. But it is getting honest. Sophie accepted that and closed her eyes again. The backyard went still except for the sound of Caleb's wrench. The car looked broken because he had spent 3 years removing everything it did not need. The registration tent for the Phoenix Desert Classic stood at the edge of the desert like a temporary courthouse for machines, white canvas snapping in the hot wind, folding tables lined with clipboards, radios, numbered decals, and wristbands that gave ordinary men permission to stand near extraordinary risks. Caleb Turner arrived at 8:06 on Monday morning with the scrapped car on Owen Briggs's flatbed trailer and Sophie beside him wearing a visitor badge so large it nearly reached the pocket of her shirt. The race was open class, 200 miles across hard desert roads, dry washes, service loops, and heat that punished bad engineering faster than pride ever could. The prize board near the tent listed $5 million for first place, but Caleb did not look at the number for long. Money that large made people stop thinking clearly. He had learned to keep his eyes on bolts, temperatures, angles, and the face of the child holding his hand. Sophie looked at the rows of professional trailers, polished transport rigs, sponsor flags, matching crew shirts, and carbon fiber bodywork shining under the Arizona sun. Are we in the right place? She asked. Caleb looked at his car sitting on the flatbed, still ugly, still unfinished to anyone who judged by paint, its mismatched panels strapped down beside a toolbox and 2 spare tires Owen had found behind his shop. Yes, he said. We are just early in a different way. The registration clerk was a young man with sunglasses pushed onto his head and the cautious smile of someone trained to be polite while saying no. He looked at the entry form, then past Caleb at the car, then back at the form. Open class still requires inspection clearance, he said. I understand. And proof of emergency shutoff, fire suppression, harness certification, steering lock, brake redundancy, roll structure, and fuel cell compliance. Caleb placed a folder on the table. Not thick. Not fancy. Complete. The clerk opened it, expecting confusion. He found checklists, photographs, receipts, diagrams, and handwritten test notes arranged in order. His smile faded into concentration. Owen stood behind Caleb with his arms crossed, trying not to look proud. Sophie stood on her toes to see the table. That was when Russell Grant walked over from the inspection lane. He was 64, retired from professional racing oversight but still called in for events where open class meant someone might arrive with genius, nonsense, or both. He had a white beard, a sun-browned face, and the slow eyes of a man who trusted metal more than presentations. He looked at Caleb's folder, then at the car. Yours? Caleb nodded. Russell walked toward the trailer. He did not laugh. He circled the machine once, stopping at the roll structure, the cooling channels, the rear suspension, the engine placement. He crouched, looked underneath, then stood and wiped dust from his fingers. Ugly, he said. Sophie's shoulders fell. Russell glanced at her, then back at Caleb. Ugly is not the same as careless. Caleb said nothing, but something in his face eased. The clerk handed over a temporary inspection tag. For the first time, the backyard car had a number on its door. Sophie touched it gently after Caleb applied it, as if the number might come loose if she believed in it too hard. Across the paddock, beyond the professional rigs and flags, a Vail Apex crew member noticed the scrap car and raised his phone. The photo would reach Derek Sloan before lunch. By sunset, Madison Vail would know Caleb Turner had not kept his machine behind the fence. He had brought it to the road. By Tuesday afternoon, the Phoenix Desert Classic Expo had turned the paddock into a bright, noisy strip of money, dust, and attention. Sponsor flags snapped in the wind. Camera crews moved between polished transport rigs. Professional teams rolled their cars onto display platforms with matching uniforms, tire warmers, telemetry carts, and enough carbon fiber to make every surface look expensive. Caleb Turner parked his flatbed at the far edge of the exhibitor lane, where the asphalt gave way to pale desert gravel and the shade from the tents did not quite reach. Owen Briggs helped him unload the car while Sophie stood beside the folding table with her oversized visitor badge and her red toy race car tucked under one arm. Caleb did not bring banners. He did not bring a media team. He had a cooler of water, a pressure gauge, 2 spare tires, a notebook, and the machine everyone kept slowing down to look at for the wrong reasons. By 3 o'clock, enough people had taken pictures that a small crowd formed without meaning to. Some smiled. Some whispered. A few pointed at the raw weld lines and mismatched panels. Caleb checked tire pressure and wrote numbers in his notebook as if none of it belonged to him. That was when the Vail Apex convoy arrived. Madison Vail stepped out first, headset around her neck, dark motorsport jacket crisp in the heat, her company's polished race car rolling behind her on a low carrier beneath a fitted cover. Derek Sloan came beside her with a tablet and the relaxed smile of a man who enjoyed an audience. He saw Caleb's car, then Caleb, then Sophie, and his smile widened. "You actually entered it," he said, loud enough for people nearby to hear. The crowd shifted closer. Madison looked at the car without speaking at first. Her eyes moved over the exposed suspension, the hand-cut panels, the uneven paint, the air channels almost hidden beneath the side bodywork. She did not recognize them yet. Not fully. Derek stepped closer, his voice carrying. "I thought the backyard was the testing facility." A few people laughed. Sophie looked down at her toy car. Caleb unscrewed the valve cap from the front tire and placed it in his palm so it would not roll away. He did not look up. Derek turned slightly toward the crowd. Open class really does mean open, apparently. Madison's expression stayed controlled, but she did not stop him. That mattered. Silence from a powerful person could become permission just as easily as laughter. Caleb checked the gauge, released a little air, checked again, and wrote the number down. Sophie moved closer to him. He reached one hand up without looking and adjusted the brim of her cap to shade her face from the sun. Only then did he stand. Madison met his eyes across the front of the car. "This course is 200 miles, she said. "It does not reward sentiment." Caleb nodded once. "Good." Derek gave a small laugh. "You think that thing survives 10 miles? Caleb picked up the valve cap and tightened it back onto the tire. "I think the road will answer that better than I can." The crowd went quiet for half a second, not because they respected him yet, but because he had refused to give them the reaction they had gathered to see. Madison looked away first, toward the Vail Apex car being uncovered under a clean tent with cameras waiting. "Make sure he passes inspection properly," she said to Derek, and walked off. Derek stayed long enough to glance at the side channels again. This time, something flickered behind his eyes before he covered it. Caleb saw it. Owen saw it too. Sophie waited until Derek left before whispering, "Was that the man from your old work?" Caleb looked at the notebook in his hand, then at the car sitting under harsh expo light while strangers decided what it was worth before it moved. "Yes," he said. "And tomorrow he is going to read the rules very carefully." This time, the laugh had an audience. Caleb let it pass through him and went back to the tires. The protest arrived before the sun had finished clearing the ridge. Caleb Turner was kneeling beside the rear suspension with a torque wrench in his hand when Russell Grant walked across the inspection lane holding a clipboard, and Derek Sloan followed 3 steps behind him with the careful expression of a man pretending procedure had nothing to do with pride. Madison Vale stood near the Vale Apex tent with her headset resting around her neck, watching without moving closer. She had cameras to face, sponsors to reassure, and a race car under a clean canopy that looked like it had been designed to win before the desert had been allowed to disagree. Caleb's car sat in the open under harsh morning light, raw welds visible, panels uneven, dust already collecting along the tires. Sophie stood beside Owen Briggs at the safety barrier with her red toy race car in both hands, the oversized badge tapping softly against her shirt each time the wind moved. Derek handed Russell a printed form. "Formal technical protest," he said. "Concerns about structural compliance, cooling system configuration, and unverified design modifications." Owen muttered something under his breath. Caleb set the torque wrench down and stood. He did not ask Derek why. He already knew why. Derek had looked too long at the side channels the day before. Men did not try to stop jokes. They tried to stop threats. Russell read the form, then looked at Caleb. "You have documentation?" Caleb reached into the cab and removed the same folder he had brought to registration, now with 3 additional pages clipped to the front. "Yes, sir." Derek's smile tightened at the word "sir," as if respect itself had become inconvenient. Russell opened the folder on a folding table and began at the first page. Brake redundancy. Harness certification. Fuel cell compliance. Roll structure measurements. Emergency shutoff. Suspension travel. Cooling path diagram. Weight distribution notes. He did not rush. A small crowd gathered because people liked conflict even more than speed when the engines were not running yet. Madison finally stepped closer, stopping behind Derek, close enough to hear but not close enough to look involved. Russell moved to the car with an inspection flashlight and a steel ruler. He checked the roll structure. He checked the welds. He checked the harness anchors, the shutoff switch, the fuel cell, the brake lines, the tire clearance. Then he crouched beside the side panel and studied the passive channels Caleb had shaped under the skin. Derek leaned in. "That system has not been certified for this class." Caleb looked at Russell, not Derek. Russell kept the flashlight steady. "Rulebook requires safe containment, no exposed hazard, and no active prohibited forced induction or cooling device outside class limits." He tapped the panel lightly with 2 fingers. "This is passive airflow." Derek's jaw moved once. "It is unconventional." Russell stood slowly. "Ugly is unconventional. Ugly is not against the rules." The sentence moved through the inspection lane quietly, then settled. A few people smiled before they could stop themselves. Madison did not. She was looking at the channel now, really looking, and something in her face shifted, not recognition yet, but the beginning of a memory finding its shape. Derek flipped a page on his clipboard as if another rule might appear if he turned hard enough. Russell handed the folder back to Caleb. "Cleared." Sophie let out a breath she had been holding too long. Owen put one hand on her shoulder. Caleb accepted the folder, nodded once, and returned it to the cab. He did not look at Derek until the last moment. "Anything else?" he asked. Derek said nothing. Madison lowered her headset from her neck and held it in one hand, eyes still on the car's side channel. They had one last chance to stop the car before the road judged it. They missed. The race began at 9 o'clock under a white Arizona sun that made every polished surface shine and every mistake expensive. Engines rolled into sound across the starting grid, deep, clean, confident, each one surrounded by crews who believed in their data, their sponsors, their matching shirts, and the money that had brought them there. Caleb Turner sat inside the scrap car with both hands on the wheel, helmet strapped, eyes steady through a windshield that still carried faint scratches from another life. The dashboard in front of him looked almost embarrassingly simple beside the systems in the Vale Apex car 2 rows ahead: temperature gauge, oil pressure, voltage, lap timer, and the small red mark Sophie had drawn near the ignition switch because she said every race car needed a heart. Sophie stood behind the safety barrier with Owen Briggs, holding her red toy race car so tightly the paint pressed into her palm. Madison Vale watched from the Vale Apex pit platform with a headset on, Derek Sloan beside her, arms folded, eyes moving between the track and the telemetry screen. When the flag dropped, the professional cars launched hard. Dust rose behind them in a broad brown wall. The Vale Apex car took the early lead before the first service loop, smooth and fast, exactly the way a car built in $1 million facility was supposed to look. Caleb did not chase. He let 3 cars pass him in the first mile. Then 2 more before mile 5. The crowd near the start line murmured, and someone behind Sophie said the backyard entry was already done. Sophie heard it. Owen heard it too. Caleb did not. He was listening to the car. At 10 miles, the heat began to climb. Not dangerously. Not yet. Enough for the expensive cars to begin asking their systems for more cooling, more fan speed, more pump pressure, more work. Caleb held his pace at a number he had written in chalk on his backyard concrete months earlier. At 25 miles, the first car came into pit lane. Early with a warning light. At 32 miles, a second slowed through the wash section, throwing dust unevenly from the rear. Vale Apex still led. Madison looked at the telemetry and allowed herself the smallest breath of confidence. Derek leaned close to the screen. He is too far back to matter. Madison did not answer. Caleb's car moved through the desert without drama. It did not look fast. That was the part people missed. It did not attack the course. It settled into it. Air entered low through the rough side channels, split beneath the panels, crossed the engine bay at the angle Caleb had spent 3 years defending in silence, and left through vents most people had mistaken for careless cuts. The temperature needle rose, paused, and stayed. At mile 48, the Vale Apex car reported its first thermal warning. Derek straightened. Madison lowered her chin slightly. "Compensate through mapping," she said. The crew adjusted. The car held speed for 6 more miles. Then lost 3 miles per hour through the long grade. At mile 60, Caleb reached the same grade, dust trailing behind him in a thin steady line. He did not brake early. He did not push late. He let the car breathe. The scrap machine climbed with the engine note flat and even, the temperature gauge refusing to move. Sophie saw his number rise on the timing screen. She did not understand all of it, but she understood Owen's hand tightening on the rail. In the Vale pit, the telemetry graph turned from routine into something no one wanted to explain first. Madison removed one side of her headset and stared at the heat curve. Derek looked away too quickly. At mile 60, the junk car stopped chasing. It started hunting. By mile 92, the Phoenix Desert Classic had stopped looking like a race and started looking like a test of who had misunderstood the desert least. The early speed was gone from half the field. Cars that had looked perfect under sponsor tents now moved with caution through the heat shimmer, their crews watching temperature readouts as if numbers could be persuaded by fear. Caleb Turner's car was still not beautiful. Dust clung to the raw panels. The mismatched tires threw pale dirt in uneven ribbons. The exposed weld lines looked even rougher under the sun. But the engine note stayed level. The temperature stayed inside the narrow band Caleb had written in chalk 100 times behind his house. Madison Vale stood in the pit area with one hand on her headset and the other gripping the edge of the telemetry cart. On the screen, the Vale Apex car showed rising heat across the long grade. Caleb's heat curve sat below it, clean and steady, not because the engine was working less, but because the air was moving exactly where he had told it to move. Madison leaned closer. There it was. The split channel. The delayed exhaust draw. The passive recovery curve. Not Derek's presentation version, the one that had looked impressive in renderings and failed under dust load. The original. The one Caleb had tried to explain years ago in her office while she decided whether his complaint was technical or personal. Her hand lowered from the headset. The pit noise seemed to thin around her. Derek Sloan stood 2 feet away, suddenly very interested in a secondary monitor. Madison looked at him. He did not look back. On the course, Caleb reached the hottest section of the race, a dry wash that climbed into a ridge road where trapped air sat above the gravel like invisible glass. The Vail Apex car entered first, still ahead but losing speed in small, expensive increments. Caleb held back for 3 turns, letting the dust clear, letting the tires settle, letting the car breathe. Then the grade opened. He moved left. The scrap car did not surge like a show car. It gathered. It held. It passed the first chase vehicle on the outside line, then closed the gap to the Vail Apex car with an engine sound so even that one of Madison's crew members took off his headset just to hear it. Sophie stood at the spectator barrier, both hands wrapped around the rail, her red toy race car pressed between her fingers. Owen Briggs watched the timing screen and did not speak. At mile 104, Caleb pulled alongside the Vail Apex car. For 3 seconds, the two machines ran together, one polished, funded, photographed, and expected, the other raw, rebuilt. Laughed at, and patient. Then Caleb's car moved ahead. No smoke. No drama. Just speed that did not fade. In the Vail pit, nobody laughed. Madison stared at the telemetry, then at Derek, and the truth arrived without asking permission. The design had come back, not in a boardroom where it could be renamed, not in a file where someone could remove his credit, but in the dust where it could not be stolen again.